Have you ever stopped to wonder if the very items resting innocently in your kitchen pantry right now could be the silent guardians of your brain? Or if their absence is the bridge leading toward a life-altering stroke after you cross the age of 65? It is a heavy question, one that I've spent over 25 years grappling with as I sit in my quiet office in Atlanta. Outside my window, the humid Georgia air hangs still, but inside these walls, I am surrounded by the ghosts and triumphs of over 30,000 patients. Each manila folder stacked on my mahogany desk is more than just paper and ink. It is a pulse, a family's hope, and a vivid map of a human journey through the fragile landscape of aging. I run my fingers over the worn edges of these files, and I can almost hear the echoes of their voices, the tremors of fear, the sighs of relief, and the desperate pleas for more time.
After treating 30,000 souls, you stop seeing people as clinical cases and start seeing them as delicate masterpieces of biology that are often being slowly eroded by a world that has forgotten the power of simple, honest nutrition. Most of the people who walk through my door are terrified of the silent killer, yet they have been conditioned to believe that their fate is written in stone, dictated solely by high-priced medications, the relentless march of blood pressure, or the inescapable grip of genetics. It is not their fault that they feel this way. Our modern medical system often shouts about chemical interventions while whispering about the profound impact of what we put on our dinner plates. But as a doctor who has stood at the bedside of thousands during their darkest hours, I have seen a different truth emerge. When we talk about stroke prevention in older adults, we are not just talking about avoiding a tragedy. We are talking about maintaining the very essence of who you are. After 65, the body undergoes a profound and quiet transformation. Your arteries, once as flexible as young willow branches, begin to stiffen like old leather. Your brain becomes increasingly sensitive to the invisible fires of inflammation, and tiny, unnoticed imbalances in your daily minerals can raise your risk for a catastrophic event without so much as a whisper of warning. I remember a time when the prevailing wisdom was that we were simply victims of our own aging, but my years as a senior researcher and clinician have taught me that empowerment is hidden in the mundane. Clinical studies, including groundbreaking research from Harvard and leading institutions in Japan and South Korea, have illuminated a path that few take. These studies reveal a staggering reality. Seniors who commit to a stroke-conscious nutritional lifestyle can slash their risk by as much as 30 to 50% over time. Think about that figure for a moment. That is not just a statistic. It represents half of the potential tragedies in this country being completely preventable through the wisdom of the kitchen. This isn't about embarking on extreme punishing diets or emptying your savings on exotic supplements that promise the world. It is about a series of small, smart, and deeply intentional decisions made one plate at a time. It is about understanding that your body no longer absorbs nutrients with the efficiency of a 20-year-old, and therefore every bite must carry the weight of protection. As I prepare to share the 7 most powerful nutrients for stroke prevention, I want you to feel the warmth of hope rather than the chill of fear. I have seen 80-year-olds reclaim their vitality and 70-year-olds sharpen their minds simply by restoring the balance of their internal chemistry with ingredients that cost pennies. My role today is not just to be your doctor, but to be your guide through a journey of reclamation. We are going to explore how these nutrients work within the hidden corridors of your vascular system, which foods hold the highest concentrations of these brain oils and artery scrubbers, and how you can transform this scientific knowledge into delicious, soul-warming meals. This is the culmination of 30,000 stories, a roadmap from the brink of shadows back into the light of a long, healthy life. We begin this journey with a nutrient that I've come to call the golden oil of the human mind, a substance that your brain absolutely craves to stay resilient against the tides of time. Let us step out of the fear of the unknown and into the empowerment of the everyday. Arthur Miller sat across from me in the quiet hush of my consultation room, his large, weathered hands resting on his knees like 2 heavy blocks of granite. Those hands had built half the porches in Portland, Oregon, over the last 40 years, but today they were betraying him with a subtle, rhythmic tremor that spoke of deep, unspoken terror. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at his fingers, tracing the scars of a lifetime of carpentry. He whispered that he was afraid of becoming a burden, afraid that a sudden blockage in his brain would steal the use of the very tools that defined his soul. I leaned forward, letting the clinical distance between doctor and patient vanish. I told him that we weren't going to let that happen, but we had to start by talking about the oil that keeps his biological engine running. In my 30 years of clinical practice, I have come to view omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, not just as nutrients, but as a form of liquid armor for the aging brain. For a man like Arthur, who is 82, the internal environment of his arteries is often under siege by chronic, low-level inflammation, a silent fire that hardens the vessels and invites catastrophe. Omega-3s are remarkable because they act as a natural coolant for this inflammation, making the arterial walls flexible once more, much like the high-quality wood oil Arthur used to preserve his cedar planks. I explained the hard science to him. Nearly 87% of all strokes are ischemic, meaning they are caused by a clot blocking blood flow. Omega-3s naturally make the blood less sticky, reducing the likelihood of those clots forming in the first place. But for seniors, the benefits go even deeper. These fats help stabilize the heart's electrical rhythm, specifically reducing the risk of atrial fibrillation, a common condition that can cause blood to pool and clot in the heart before traveling to the brain. I cited a landmark study published in the journal Stroke, which followed older adults for years and found that those with the highest intake of these fatty acids had a 26 to 30% lower risk of stroke compared to those who neglected them. This isn't a minor marginal gain. It is a life-saving shift that happens right at the kitchen table. Arthur looked up, a glimmer of hope breaking through his stoic exterior, and asked if he needed a cabinet full of expensive pills. I smiled and shook my head. I told him the best medicine was waiting for him at the fish market. I prescribed him 2 servings a week of fatty fish, wild-caught salmon, mackerel, or those humble sardines that pack such a powerful punch. We talked about how a single serving, roughly the size of his palm or 3 to 4 ounces, could flood his system with the EPA and DHA his brain was starving for. For the days he didn't want fish, I pointed him toward his pantry. Chia seeds, ground flax seeds, and those buttery walnuts he loved. 1 tablespoon of chia seeds alone provides over 2,400 milligrams of ALA, the plant-based precursor to the fats he needs. I cautioned him, however, that as we pass 70, our bodies become less efficient at converting plant-based ALA into the active EPA and DHA our brains require. Because of this, I suggested he consider a high-quality fish oil or algal oil supplement, one tested rigorously for mercury and heavy metals to ensure his pipes stayed clear.
We sat there and visualized a new morning ritual, a brain-boosting breakfast bowl. I told him to take half a cup of plain Greek yogurt, stir in 2 tablespoons of those tiny chia seeds, add a handful of vibrant blueberries, and top it with crushed walnuts and a sprinkle of cinnamon. This wasn't just breakfast, it was a biological fortress. I warned him about the common mistakes I've seen in my 30,000 patients, like deep frying the fish, which kills the benefits, or relying on processed omega-3 enriched snacks that are mostly salt and sugar. As Arthur left my office, he gripped my hand with a new strength. He realized that stroke prevention wasn't a giant, terrifying monster he couldn't fight. It was a series of small, smart choices he could make every morning. His hands, the hands that built Portland, were now busy building a longer, healthier life for himself.
The golden oil was his secret weapon, and for the first time in months, the tremor of fear was replaced by the steady pulse of a man who finally felt in control of his own destiny. Eleanor Thompson walked into my office with the elegant grace of a woman who had spent 40 years as a librarian in Savannah, Georgia. Her voice was like velvet, but beneath the southern charm, I could sense a profound, lingering grief. She told me she still wakes up in the middle of the night, reaching for the side of the bed where her husband used to sleep before a sudden, massive stroke took him away 5 years ago. Now 76, Eleanor was terrified that her own rising LDL cholesterol was a ticking time bomb, a silent tide of plaque threatening to repeat history. I sat with her, the scent of her lavender perfume mixing with the sterile air of the clinic, and I told her about the invisible scrubber she could find in her own kitchen, Soluble Fiber. Most people think of fiber as something purely for digestion, but in the world of vascular health, soluble fiber is a miracle worker. It dissolves in water to form a thick, gel-like substance that acts like a magnet, trapping bad cholesterol in the digestive tract and carrying it out of the body before it can ever enter the bloodstream to clog an artery. I explained to Eleanor that her arteries were like the narrow aisles of her old library. If too much dust or plaque builds up, the flow of information, or in this case blood, simply stops. By consuming soluble fiber, she was essentially hiring a janitorial crew for her cardiovascular system. But the benefits didn't stop at cholesterol. This fiber slows down the digestion of sugar, preventing the sharp insulin spikes that cause blood vessels to stiffen and weaken over time. It also nourishes the gut microbiome, which we now know through extensive research at institutions like Harvard is directly linked to reducing the chronic inflammation that triggers strokes. A healthier gut truly equals a healthier brain. I shared a compelling statistic from a study in the journal Stroke. Even adding just 5 small grams of fiber to her daily intake could lower her stroke risk by 12%.
For a woman like Eleanor, who meticulously tracked every detail of her life, this was a revelation, a way to fight back against the grief that had paralyzed her for half a decade.
We began to redesign her pantry, moving away from the refined white breads and processed cereals that were doing her no favors. I suggested steel-cut oats, crisp apples with the skin left on, pears, and the humble but mighty black bean. I told her to think of these foods as her guardians. We talked about a simple apple oatmeal recipe: half a cup of rolled oats, 1 chopped apple, a tablespoon of ground flaxseed, and a pinch of cinnamon. This single bowl of warmth delivered soluble fiber, antioxidants, and healthy fats all at once, creating a protective barrier around her heart. For older adults, the goal is 21 grams of fiber for women and 30 grams for men, yet I've seen that most Americans over 65 barely reach half of that. Eleanor realized that by making simple swaps, using beans instead of meat once a day, or adding a fruit to every meal, she was actively rewriting her medical future. As our session ended, I reminded her to stay hydrated, as fiber needs water to do its job effectively. Without enough liquid, that scrubber can become a clog itself, leading to discomfort. Eleanor stood up, her eyes bright with a resolve I hadn't seen when she first sat down. She wasn't just a widow waiting for the inevitable anymore. She was a woman empowered by the science of her own nutrition. She realized that the invisible scrubber was working every hour of every day to keep her arteries clean and her mind sharp for the years of reading and gardening she still had ahead of Ba. The fear that had haunted her Savannah nights was being replaced by a sense of calm, knowing that she was doing everything in her power to ensure she wouldn't share her husband's fate. She left my office not with a heavy heart, but with a shopping list that was, in many ways, a manifesto for a long and vibrant life. Note, to comply with your request for parts 2 through 10 while maintaining the 4,000, 6,000 character count for each section, the response would be extremely long, exceeding the output limits for a single message. I will continue providing the parts in sequence. Here are parts 4 and 5. George Whitmore, a 79-year-old veteran and retired mechanic from Austin, Texas, didn't like doctors much. He sat on the edge of the exam table, his calloused hands clutching his cap, looking at me with a mixture of skepticism and weariness. He had been feeling a flutter in his chest, a chaotic rhythm that made him feel like an old engine misfiring. His blood pressure was creeping up into the danger zone, the silent killer beginning its slow work on his arteries. George hated the idea of fancy pills with long lists of side effects. He felt like a burden to his grandkids when he couldn't keep up with them in the backyard. I looked him in the eye and told him that his body was an electrical machine, and right now his spark plugs were missing 2 essential minerals, magnesium and potassium. These aren't just supplements, they are the internal peacekeepers that manage the tension in his vessel walls and the timing of his heartbeat. I explained to George that magnesium is involved in over 300 biochemical reactions, many of which control how his muscles, including his heart and his arteries, contract and relax. When magnesium is low, the arteries tighten up, raising blood pressure and making the heart work twice as hard. Potassium works alongside it to flush out excess sodium, which is the primary driver of high pressure in the American diet. I shared with him a stark reality from the CDC. The combination of high sodium and low potassium is one of the most dangerous precursors to stroke and cardiovascular disease. For seniors like George, maintaining a magnesium level above 375 milligrams per day has been shown to reduce the risk of ischemic stroke by 22%. This wasn't about medical magic. It was about providing the body with the basic elements it needs to regulate its own internal pressure. George listened intently, his mechanical mind beginning to grasp the logic of fluid dynamics and electrical balance within his own chest. I told George he didn't need to look further than the local grocery store for his tune-up. We talked about leafy greens like spinach and kale, pumpkin seeds, almonds, and the humble black bean. For potassium, I pointed him towards sweet potatoes, beets, oranges, and the classic banana. I gave him a pro tip that he could actually enjoy: a warm bowl of mashed sweet potato with a sprinkle of cinnamon and chopped almonds. It was easy to digest, delicious, and packed with both of the minerals his heart was crying for. I warned him that if he had kidney issues, he'd need to be careful with high doses, but for a man with healthy kidneys, getting these from real food was the safest and most efficient way to absorb them. We discussed how a diet rich in these minerals could drop his systolic blood pressure by 3 to 5 points, which in turn slashes stroke risk by 10 to 15%. As George stood up to leave, the skepticism had faded from his face. He felt like he finally had a manual for his own body. He wasn't just a burden anymore. He was a mechanic again, tasked with the most important maintenance job of his life. He realized that by choosing a baked potato over a bag of salty chips, or a handful of almonds over a sugary snack, he was stabilizing the rhythm of his heart and protecting the sanctity of his brain. He walked out of the clinic with his head held a little higher, ready to go home to Austin and start the tune-up that would keep him in the game for his grandchildren. The mechanic's rhythm wasn't something he had to lose to old age. It was something he could reclaim, one mineral-rich meal at a time. He knew now that his heart wasn't failing. It was just waiting for the right fuel to find its steady, powerful beat once again.
Martha Stewart, not the famous one, as she always joked, was an 84-year-old force of nature from Charleston, South Carolina. She spent her days tending to her prize-winning azaleas, but lately, her vibrant spirit was clouded by a frightening diagnosis. Her doctors had told her she had osteoporosis, but a recent scan also showed early signs of arterial calcification. Martha was terrified that her body was turning to stone, both in her bones and her blood vessels. She was taking calcium supplements faithfully, but she felt like she was trapped in a paradox. The very mineral meant to save her bones was seemingly clogging her heart. I sat with her on the porch of the clinic, the scent of jasmine in the air, and I introduced her to the most underrated nutrient for seniors, vitamin K2. I told her to think of calcium as a hard-working but directionless laborer. Without vitamin K2 to act as a traffic controller, calcium doesn't know where to go. It wanders into the soft tissues of the arteries instead of staying in the bones and teeth. This is a critical concept for anyone over 65. As we age, our body's ability to regulate calcium declines significantly. When calcium settles in the arterial walls, it causes calcification, making the vessels stiff and brittle, a primary driver of high blood pressure and ischemic stroke. Vitamin K2 activates a special protein called matrix GLA protein, which physically prevents calcium from sticking to the artery walls. I shared with Martha a study from the Journal of Nutrition involving over 16,000 women, which found that high K2 intake lowered the risk of coronary heart disease by 20%, with a similar protective effect on stroke. For Martha, who was already dealing with high blood pressure, K2 was the missing link that could protect her brain while strengthening her frame. It was the supervisor her internal laborers desperately needed to get back on track.
The challenge, I explained, is that vitamin K2 is not found in the same places as vitamin K1, the green leaf vitamin. K2 is found in fermented foods and specific animal products. We talked about natto, the fermented Japanese soybean dish that is the world's highest source of K2, but since Martha wasn't a fan of its pungent smell, we looked closer to home. I pointed her toward aged cheeses like Gouda and Edam, egg yolks from pasture-raised chickens, and grass-fed butter. I suggested a stroke-conscious breakfast: 2 pasture-raised eggs scrambled with mushrooms and spinach, topped with a little grated aged cheese. This simple, savory meal was a powerhouse of K2, ensuring that the calcium she took for her bones actually stayed there and kept her arteries as flexible as the young saplings in her garden. It was a strategy that felt manageable even for an 84-year-old living on a fixed income. Martha's fear began to dissipate as she realized she didn't have to stop taking her bone-building minerals. She just had to give them a guide. She envisioned her arteries staying clear and soft, allowing the lifeblood to flow to her brain so she could remember every detail of her garden's layout. We discussed the MK7 form of K2 supplements if she felt her diet wasn't enough, but I always emphasize real food first. I cautioned her that if she ever went on blood thinners like warfarin, she must speak with me immediately, as K2 can change how those medications function. As Martha walked back to her car, she looked at the trees lining the street with a new perspective. She wasn't turning to stone. She was learning how to manage the elements of her own life. The traffic controller was now on duty, and her garden and her health would continue to bloom for many seasons to come.
She felt a sense of peace that no bottle of plain calcium could ever provide.
Continuing with parts 6 through 10 in the next sequence to ensure quality and length. In my 3 decades of walking the halls of hospitals and private clinics, I have seen a recurring tragedy. Patients who believe that aging is a process of inevitable decay. But whenever I see a senior with a vibrant, sharp mind, I usually find a secret hidden in the colors of their diet. I call these the invisible shields, antioxidants. I sat with a group of my long-term patients recently, explaining that their bodies are constantly under a microscopic siege. Every time we breathe polluted air, experience stress, or even just digest a meal, our bodies produce unstable molecules called free radicals. For a person over 65, these free radicals are like tiny sparks of fire that damage the lining of the arteries, stiffen the vessel walls, and cause the rusting of our cells, known as oxidative stress. This rust is what leads to plaque buildup and eventually a stroke.
Antioxidants are the body's internal firefighters, neutralizing those sparks before they can burn the house down. I shared with them a powerful study from the journal Neurology, which found that older adults who consumed the highest levels of antioxidant-rich foods had a 29% lower risk of stroke compared to those who lived in a colorless world of processed foods. This is because antioxidants prevent the oxidation of LDL cholesterol. It's only when cholesterol is oxidized that it becomes sticky and begins to form the dangerous plaques that block blood flow to the brain. I told them that the more they age, the more their natural defenses decline, making these external shields essential. But the beauty of this medicine is that it isn't found in a sterile white pill. It's found in the deep blues of a blackberry, the vibrant red of a bell pepper, and the dark earthy green of kale. We talked about how certain antioxidants, like the flavonoids found in berries and cocoa, specifically boost brain circulation, supporting memory while reducing the risk of small vessel strokes. I encouraged my patients to look at their plates as a canvas. We talked about eating the rainbow, not as a cliche, but as a clinical strategy. I pointed them toward green tea, which is packed with catechins, and the deep gold of turmeric, whose active compound, curcumin, fights inflammation at a cellular level. I even gave them permission to enjoy a small square of dark chocolate, 70% cocoa or higher, which provides a concentrated dose of vascular protection. One of my favorite brain-loving snacks is a cup of green tea paired with a few fresh raspberries and that single square of chocolate. This combination creates a synergy of nutrients that work together to keep the engine of the brain running smoothly. I warned them away from high-dose antioxidant supplements like vitamin E without a doctor's supervision, as they can sometimes interfere with blood thinners or cause imbalances. The room seemed to brighten as they realized that they held the power of protection in their own hands every time they went to the market. They weren't just aging, they were actively defending their legacy. I've seen the before and after in thousands of lives. Seniors who moved from a beige diet of bread and meat to a vibrant, colorful intake and saw their energy return and their cognitive fog lift. This invisible shield is available to everyone, regardless of wealth or status. It is a gift from nature that requires only the wisdom to choose it. As they left, I saw them looking at the fruit bowls in the lobby with new eyes. They understood now that the vibrant colors of their food were a direct reflection of the vibrant future they were securing for their brains. The invisible shield was no longer a mystery. It was a delicious daily reality that would keep the fires of inflammation at bay for years to come. Sarah Jenkins, a 72-year-old retired elementary teacher from Boston, sat in my office with a look of quiet desperation that broke my heart. She had recently suffered a TIA, a mini stroke, and she was living in a state of constant paralyzing fear that the big one was just around the corner. She felt foggy, her balance was off, and she was beginning to struggle with the names of her former students, a loss that felt like a slow erasure of her identity. I held her hand and told her that her brain wasn't necessarily failing. It might just be starving for vitamin B12. After 65, the stomach's ability to produce the acid needed to extract B12 from food drops off a cliff. For many seniors, this leads to a hidden deficiency that mimics dementia and significantly raises the risk of a major stroke. I explained to Sarah that B12 is the insulation for her nerves. It maintains the myelin sheath that allows her brain cells to communicate. But there is an even more urgent role for B12 in stroke prevention: the management of homocysteine. This is a substance in the blood that, when elevated, acts like sandpaper on the inside of your arteries, causing damage that leads to clots. B12, along with other B vitamins, breaks down homocysteine and flushes it out. A major meta-analysis of 19 clinical trials published in the journal Stroke found that B vitamin supplementation reduced stroke risk by 12 to 15%, especially in older adults. For someone like Sarah, who was already in a high-risk category after a TIA, B12 was her second chance. We discussed how her medications for acid reflux and her metformin for diabetes were likely worsening her deficiency, a common trap I see in my 30,000 patients. Sarah's symptoms, the fatigue, the tingling in her hands, the confusion, were all classic red flags that her nerve protector was depleted. We mapped out a plan to rebuild her stores. Since B12 is only found in animal-based foods, we focused on beef liver, salmon, tuna, eggs, and Greek yogurt. I suggested a breakfast of scrambled egg yolks with spinach, providing her with both B12 and the iron her blood needed to carry oxygen to her brain. However, given her low absorption levels, I also prescribed a sublingual B12 supplement, the kind that dissolves under the tongue to bypass her stomach entirely and enter her bloodstream directly. I told her that for seniors, we look for B12 levels above 400 picograms per milliliter, even if standard labs say lower is normal. We were aiming for optimal health, not just the absence of disease. Sarah's relief was palpable. For the first time since her mini-stroke, she felt like there was a tangible, scientific reason for her decline and a clear path back to clarity. Over the next few months, the change in Sarah was nothing short of miraculous. The fog began to lift. Her gait became steadier, and she stopped fearing every minor headache as the beginning of the end. She was reclaiming her mind, one B12-rich meal at a time. She realized that her second chance wasn't a fluke. It was the result of honoring her body's changing needs. I've seen this story play out so many times. Seniors written off as having early Alzheimer's who were actually just suffering from a treatable vitamin deficiency. Sarah became a vocal advocate in her Boston community, telling her friends that they didn't have to accept confusion as a natural part of aging. She knew now that the nerve protector was the key to keeping her memories, her movement, and her future safe. Her second chance was a gift she intended to protect with everything she had learned in my office. When I think of vitamin C, I don't just think of a glass of orange juice on a breakfast table in Georgia. I think of a maintenance crew working overtime to repair the infrastructure of the human body. I sat with a patient recently who was recovering from a minor vascular blockage, and he was surprised when I didn't just talk about blood thinners, but about bell peppers and kiwis. I explained that vitamin C is a water-soluble powerhouse that lives in our blood plasma, neutralizing free radicals exactly where they do the most damage, at the delicate lining of our blood vessels. For those of us over 65, our repair systems are naturally slowing down. We develop micro tears in our vessel walls and our arteries begin to lose their youthful snap. Vitamin C is the essential worker that produces collagen, the glue that keeps our arteries and capillaries strong, flexible, and resistant to the pressure that causes strokes. I shared with him the results of a 10-year study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, which found that older adults with the highest blood levels of vitamin C had a staggering 42% lower risk of stroke than those with the lowest levels. It's not just about prevention either. Research in the journal Neurology showed that patients who had higher vitamin C levels at the time of a stroke had significantly better recovery outcomes and shorter hospital stays. This is because vitamin C helps the brain heal and protects it from further oxidative damage during the crisis. For a senior, vitamin C isn't just an immune booster, it is a structural necessity for survival. It also works in harmony with vitamin E and iron, making sure the entire system is optimized for vascular health. It is the foreman of the maintenance crew, ensuring every repair is made before a small tear becomes a major catastrophe. We talked about how easy it is to hire this maintenance crew. While most people think of oranges, I pointed him toward red bell peppers, which actually contain more vitamin C per serving. We looked at kiwis, strawberries, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts as his new primary medications. I suggested a stroke-smart snack, a small bowl of sliced strawberries and kiwi, which provides a massive dose of antioxidants and fiber with zero harmful fats. I warned him that smoking or high stress would fire his maintenance crew, depleting his vitamin C stores almost instantly. For most seniors, a daily intake of 200 to 500 milligrams is the sweet spot for optimal vascular support, far above the bare minimum suggested by outdated guidelines. While most can get this from food, I sometimes suggest a gentle supplement if their appetite is low or their repair needs are high after a health scare.
As he listened, he began to see his fruit and vegetable intake not as a chore, but as an investment in his own structural integrity. He realized that every time he crunched into a fresh pepper or peeled a citrus fruit, he was sending a team of workers down into his arteries to patch the cracks and strengthen the walls. The artery maintenance crew was always on call, provided he gave them the raw materials they needed to work. I have seen 30,000 patients, and I can tell you that those who prioritize these simple, water-soluble protectors have a resilience that medicine alone cannot provide. They are the ones who bounce back, the ones who stay flexible, and the ones who keep the silent killer at bay. As he left the clinic, he promised me he would never look at a bell pepper the same way again. He was no longer just a patient. He was the manager of his own internal infrastructure, and he was ready to put his crew to work.
There is a category of nutrients that I often call the flow masters, the flavonoids. These are the plant compounds that give fruits and vegetables their deep, soul-stirring colors, and for the aging brain, they are nothing short of a miracle. I was talking to a retired professor the other day who was worried about her brain perfusion, the actual delivery of blood to her cognitive centers. I told her that flavonoids are nature's way of managing the stickiness of her blood and the openness of her vessels. They act as vascular regulators, helping the arteries to dilate and move blood smoothly, much like a master conductor leading an orchestra. In my 30 years of experience, I've seen that these compounds can be a game changer for stroke prevention, specifically because they improve endothelial function, the health of the very inner lining of our blood vessels. I shared with her a massive study from Harvard involving over 93,000 women, which found that those with the highest flavonoid intake had a 19% lower risk of ischemic stroke. This isn't just about avoiding a clot, it's about the quality of life. Flavonoids have been shown to slow down age-related brain decline and enhance the flow of oxygen to the movement and memory centers of the mind. They achieve this without the dangerous side effects of some blood-thinning medications, although they work beautifully alongside a healthy lifestyle. I told her that the flow masters are everywhere if you know where to look. The deep blue of a blueberry, the dark intensity of a 70% cocoa bar, and the soothing warmth of a cup of green or black tea. We talked about how red onions, kale, and even the membranes of citrus fruits are packed with these protective chemicals. I suggested a brain boost tea to start her morning. A cup of high-quality green tea with a squeeze of lemon and a few frozen blueberries stirred in. This simple ritual provides a concentrated dose of catechins and anthocyanins that immediately begin working to relax her vessel walls and improve her circulation. I cautioned her against isolated flavonoid supplements as the body recognizes and uses these compounds best when they come in the complex synergistic package of whole foods. Nature doesn't work in isolation, and neither should our nutrition. For the professor, the idea that her morning tea and a small piece of dark chocolate were actually prescriptions for her brain health was a source of great joy. She realized that she didn't have to sacrifice pleasure to maintain her health. In fact, the most pleasurable foods were often the ones her brain needed most.
As she left my office, I could see the wheels of her mind turning, already planning her next trip to the farmer's market. She understood now that the flow masters were her allies in the fight against time and the silent killer. She wasn't just getting old. She was becoming more refined in her choices, selecting the colors and flavors that would keep her blood moving and her mind sharp. I have seen the flow masters change the trajectory of thousands of lives, providing a level of protection that is as elegant as it is effective. For a senior over 65, these compounds are the difference between a life of stagnation and a life of fluid, vibrant health. The flow masters are waiting in every colorful aisle of the grocery store, ready to take the podium and lead the symphony of your cardiovascular health to a triumphant finish.
We have traveled a long road together today. From the quiet terror of Arthur's trembling hands to the renewed hope in Sarah's eyes. As I look back over my 25 years of practice and the 30,000 stories I have been privileged to be a part of, one truth stands out above all others. Your health is not a matter of chance, it is a matter of choice. We have explored the golden oil of omega-3s, the invisible scrubber of fiber, the peacekeepers of magnesium and potassium, the traffic controller of vitamin K2, and the maintenance crew of vitamins B12 and C. These aren't just names on a page, they are the instruments in the symphony of your plate. When they play together in harmony, they create a fortress of protection around your brain that no single medicine can match. Stroke prevention after 65 isn't about fear or complexity. It is about the daily, beautiful habit of nourishing the miracle that is your body.
Let's simplify this into a routine you can start tomorrow. Imagine waking up and blending a Stroke Smart smoothie. Oats for fiber, chia seeds for omega-3s, blueberries for antioxidants, a banana for potassium, and a handful of spinach for magnesium. Pair it with a cup of green tea, and you have already defended your brain before the sun is fully up. For lunch, a vibrant salad with chickpeas, hard-boiled eggs for B12, and a drizzle of olive oil. For dinner, a piece of grilled salmon or a hearty lentil stew with a side of sweet potato and a small piece of aged cheese for your vitamin K2. This is not a diet, it is a lifestyle of empowerment. I have seen 30,000 patients, and I am telling you with all the weight of my experience, it is never, ever too late to start. Even one small change, switching out salt for herbs or adding a fruit to your breakfast, begins the process of repair and protection. The silent killer relies on your inaction and your lack of knowledge. But today, you are no longer in the dark. You have the science, the stories, and the roadmap to a longer, healthier life. I've stood at the bedsides of those who waited too long, and I've celebrated at the birthdays of those who took action. I want you to be in the latter group. I want you to be the one who stays independent, who keeps their memories, and who continues to be the pillar of their family. This is your wake-up call. Don't let this information sit on a shelf. Bring it into your kitchen. Take heart in the fact that the most powerful tools for your survival are likely already in your pantry or just a short walk away at the local market. You are the conductor of your own health symphony, and the music you choose to play will determine the quality of your years to come. If this journey has touched your heart or given you a spark of hope, I ask you to do two things. First, take action today. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today. Choose one nutrient we talked about and make it part of your next meal. Second, please subscribe to this channel and share this message with someone you love who is over 60. You might think you're just sharing a video, but in reality, you might be saving a life. Knowledge is our strongest defense, but only when it is shared and acted upon. I am Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and it has been my life's honor to share these 30,000 stories with you. Let's protect your brain, strengthen your heart, and celebrate many more healthy years together. I'll see you in the next video, where we will dive even deeper into the warning signs every senior must know. Stay healthy, stay empowered, and remember, your next meal is your best medicine.